It's
All right, and welcome to the Cambridge Skeptics live stream. My name is Erika, and I will be hosting our talk today. And with me, we have got Sam, Chris, and Andrew. I'm probably not pointing in the right places, but that's fine. Yes, and we've been having some fun with some arts and crafts. This is not an episode of Blue Peter, but it kind of turned into one behind the scenes. So we are the Cambridge Skeptics, and that is a volunteer organization dedicated to promoting critical thinking, science, and particularly for today, I think we should emphasize positive skepticism in our local community of Cambridge, but also across the UK and beyond. And today, our topic is pseudo-archaeology and ancient aliens. And I think it's worth, and Andrew has a hat, which is amazing. The only thing, so I used to be an archaeologist, and I actually used to have a hat really similar to that. I don't even know where my trowel has gone. So I found some photos from my past that there's me digging something. So it slightly legitimizes. And these are physical photos from when I was 18. So before people said you can't photograph digs because of social media. That's also my PhD thesis. Yeah. And
CGI. It's just clearly CGI.
This is part of the pseudo-archaeology, guys. It's very meta. No. But I actually why don't I kick off by asking you guys, can you just quickly tell us what we mean by positive skepticism? Because I think it's a good note to start on.
I'm not allowed to insult the idiots.
It's the idea being that we're trying to challenge people's beliefs in a constructive fashion and bring them over to the light side rather than just criticize them for being on the dark side.
Yeah, we're not just setting out to debunk people or it's providing people with the tools to evaluate their beliefs themselves and see if they stand up.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so I'm not that worried. We're not going to sit here and just completely bash maybe certain TV shows or YouTube streams or something like that. Even if they are frustrating, then we might have a good laugh. That's not the only thing that we want to do together. We want this conversation to also be a place for people who are oh, but that's my secret guilty pleasure. What's wrong with it? I know it's trash, but am I a terrible person for enjoying it? And the answer is no. And instead, I want to focus today on some useful tools. Exactly. We're going to have so much fun with that. But yeah, I want to focus on something useful that we can take away. So I thought I would get started by setting the scene and asking you guys how much you know about archaeology. So this is because I have personal experience and the first-hand experience of my friends saying I'm an archaeologist, and then people immediately wanted to talk about dinosaurs. and I don't know, and there's actually loads of examples on Twitter where someone's yeah, I just disappointed an entire class of 6-year-olds at being at my 6-year-old son's career today because the teacher thought that I did dinosaurs, and all of the kids were really disappointed. So let's start by playing a little game. I am going to show you some examples of some headlines from the news, and based off of the headline alone, or if you happen to use the news, I never remember the news article, that's fine too. But I want you to tell me, do you think it's archaeology? Yes, no, or the answer can sometimes be maybe. It can be actually there's not enough information to say. All right.
So if I may just interject here briefly, but
yes.
It turns out that streaming on YouTube doesn't work in the same way as streaming on Zoom, and we can only see the person that's talking. So I think we might need to say our answers rather than show our answers, because nobody's going to see us showing anything.
Well, I'll see them. And the main thing is that I want you guys to give your answers without consulting or being biased by each other. So you will still get to display your answers. Okay, so the first headline is, let me make sure I'm on the right screen, is scientists say new dinosaur species is largest found in Australia. Yes, we've got 3 no's. The answer is no. Okay, good. That was an easy one. The answer is no. Next one, medieval pointy-toed shoes led to Cambridge bunion surge. What a great example. It's local. Is it the archaeology? Yes, no, or maybe. The answer is yes. This was done by, the study was done by a Cambridge archaeological unit. I want to know why did you say no?
Because I thought it was too recent to be archaeology.
Medieval.
You could do modern archaeology, industrial archaeology.
But like I don't know. I feel like if it's just like a historical record, then it's
that's a really good point.
Like,
but maybe they dug up, I don't know, bones and looked at how they would damage.
They did. That was exactly the study. So you're right, Sam. If it had been purely based on historical records, then it would be history, not archaeology. But in this case, this study was looking at deformed human remains that were found in an archaeological dig in Cambridge, which was uncovered due to some construction. And they showed an increased prevalence in foot abnormalities in the toe bones that were bunions that were correlated with the fat for pointy-toed shoes. But you're right that they're relying on documentary evidence to tell the whole story of what's going on. So they're relying on the documentary.
So it was maybe.
I mean, it was done by archaeologists. I say it's a yes. But there's often no like clear-cut answers. Like archaeology is a very interdisciplinary field. Okay, next one. Amazon dwellers lived sustainably for 5,000 years.
Yeah.
Anyone else? If you can't see, Chris made a sign that says aliens. Sam, so we've got a yes, we've got an aliens, and we've got a question mark. So the answer here is maybe. So looking at this study, it seems like it's very interdisciplinary. There's clearly a historical element. There's clearly an element of looking at remains in the past. It's probably not. There's probably nobody with the job title archaeologist, however, on this study, but there could have been. It could be part of that kind of gray zone. All right, so now these are going to get maybe a bit harder, I think. Scientists have found the origins of a mysterious deadly flood in India. What do you say? Yes, a maybe and a no. The answer is no. And for this one, you do have for the context, the flood happened in February. So if you know that the flood happened in February, the answer is clearly no.
Depends when the cause was. I mean,
the cause happened thousands of years ago.
Delayed.
But you and I have had this conversation before as to like how far back does it need to be archaeology? And you were saying there's some funny thing about digging up bones.
Okay, well, and we'll actually get onto that example. Okay. Next example, new clues suggest people reached the Americas around 30,000 years ago. Is it archaeology?
What are the new clues? I don't know.
The answer is yes. Why might you think that it wasn't?
I was thinking like maybe there's an element of maybe it's done through genetics. It's like, oh yeah, okay, we can see this.
Good point. Yep. But archaeologists can do genetics. We can do anything.
No, they can't.
Yep. I mean, I was doing chemistry, and what do I know?
They can't do dinosaurs, I know that.
You can't do dinosaurs. You can't do dinosaurs. And you definitely can't do genetics on dinosaurs, by the way, because the DNA degrades. Like, it's any DNA from dinosaurs.
Oh, now you can do dinosaurs.
Are you telling me movies have lied to me?
No dinosaurs. Can't emphasize that enough. Here's an example. I want to mention this. This is a very negative example. It's from Canada's past. It's about our residential school catastrophe, and I really want to raise awareness for it, which is why I'm bringing it up. So this is remains of 215 children found buried at a former BC residential school. And if you want to find out more about this, just search for residential schools in Canada and you'll be able to hear more about this issue. But the question here is it archaeology? One no, a no and a yes. So to answer this, the answer depends how old something has to be for it to be archaeology. And basically the forensics hasn't been done on this yet. Many countries have a sort of arbitrary dividing line between history and archaeology. So I'm pretty sure in the UK, anything that's more than 100 years old is classified as archaeology. So it means, so quite often you'll have the police show up and say, hey, you need to radiocarbonate this bone because we don't know if we should be trying to investigate a murder or not. So if you can radiocarbonate it and tell us which side of that line it's on. And then, by the way, I should say for context that like you can tell a recently decayed human bone from like a bone that's 3,000 years old. Like that part is really obvious. The question is really whether like where on that side of that line it falls.
Is it 80 versus 120? Exactly.
That's not really possible to eyeball. So and even then you'd want to radiocarbonate like.
So
there's a weird thing going on.
I remember Time Team digging up a World War II site. Was that not archaeology?
Sorry, I should say like strictly in terms of police forensics.
Yeah.
So the police usually have sort of a dividing line at which they'll say like, okay, we're not going to treat this human remain like it's a murder case. We're going to treat it like it's a burial, like we're going to sort of treat it with a historical perspective. But obviously, yes, archaeology can happen anywhere. Like when you are, digging through your old coat pockets and you find all these weird receipts from when you last wore that coat 5 years ago, you are doing archaeology on your own past. So there's no sort of, in terms of the actual like study or the practice of it, there's no kind of upper limit. We can use the techniques.
And this is why when I dig through my old pockets, I never find dinosaurs.
Correct, because as I said,
that's not archaeology. Got it.
That's like the number one thing I want us to take away from this. So that one is probably not archaeology because just looking at the date that particular school was active. So that means, that the police definitely need to be getting involved in what's going on there. I think this might be our second last example. The oldest animal DNA ever reveals mammoth evolution. Yes, a unanimous answer on no. That is correct because it's nothing to do with humans. So it's definitely not archaeology in that case, even though humans might have interacted with mammals. In this case, the particular study has nothing to do with humans. And last one, the oldest known tattoo tools were found at an ancient Tennessee site. 3 yeses, hooray, we've got there, exactly. So this is archaeology because it's about the physical remains of human culture. And that's really the definition of what archaeology is. So not dinosaurs. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. And I wanted to ask you guys, the question now is, what is pseudo-archaeology? Because you guys have been thinking about pseudo-archaeology for the past week or so, couple weeks. And I think you've come across some examples of stuff that you think is definitely pseudo-archaeology. And Andrew, you made a face first. So tell me what examples you think you found.
Don't react. That's
the one that's really stuck in my mind is the 15 times, according to Wikipedia, that they found Noah's Ark. So yeah, I think that counts as pseudo-archaeology.
Would it not have been pseudo-archaeology if they'd only claimed to have found it once?
I still think it would have, because I think that the evidence suggests that the whole thing never happened. So, there was a headline which I read this morning when I was looking through it again, from the Express from just last year, where it was something along the lines of scientists are 99.9% sure they've discovered Noah's Ark. And I was like, well, that's impressive. Discovering something which we don't think actually existed in the first place is, so yeah, that's the example that's really stuck with me.
Yeah, that's a good one. And we're gonna talk about why we think that is pseudo-archaeology, what some common themes are for a second. But I think that's a great example. Chris, what have you? Give us some examples.
So back when I was a believer, I remember reading von Daniken's Chariots of the God.
Yes.
Gods. And
Yes.
I remember one piece of evidence that really persuaded me was the Palenque tomb carving of an Aztec ascending to heaven on what, to me, as someone who knows nothing about Mayan art or Central America or anthropology, looked like a rocket ship.
Yep.
But yeah, I guess, to someone who knows about those things, probably doesn't look much like a rocket ship. But.
Yep. A good example. Sam, what examples of pseudo-archaeology have you found?
Well, we were a couple of weeks ago. We were watching a sort of documentary on sort of Mormonism and some stuff around there, and poking around after that is that there's a lot of sort of Mormon. Oh, this was the thing done by here's some example of these sort of Jewish forces in America 2,000 years ago, and it was just it's incredibly flaky. Basically, it's like, we're going to do all of our tests ourselves and come up with answers that happen to bolster our beliefs, and we're not going to let anyone else look at it. And you're just like,
Yep. So a lot of the pseudo-archaeology is not any, it shares a lot of the same features with any pseudoscientific discipline, and actually any like other kind of like conspiracy thinking. Actually, I would love if anyone's in the chat and you want to give your examples of pseudo-archaeology that you've encountered. Go ahead and list them. Maybe we can talk about them if they're something that I'm familiar with off the top of my head. So pseudo-archaeology, it shares these common features with any pseudoscience, and a lot of it overlaps with general conspiracy thinkings. So things like you were saying, like people do their work on their own. They're sort of persecuted from the main establishment. Obviously, features that we see is where they're sort of rejecting the scientific method, and that's the reason why they're not accepted then by the mainstream scientists working in this field. And I just see an example in the chat about the Mormon golden plates is a really interesting example. And actually, I'm gonna talk about sort of something related to that in a little bit. But so that pseudo-archaeology shares all these common features with any pseudoscience. But there are also some big themes that are kind of specific to archaeology. Well, I want to talk to you guys about those themes, but first, I want to give you a debunking toolkit that's specific to archaeology, and a bit of an archaeology joke for you guys, but we use the word toolkit to refer to like the assemblage of tools that is characteristic of any one culture at any one time. So like you'll have like the Mousterian toolkit or like the the Neolithic toolkit. So just like it's a little bit of a pun, just for me.
So archaeologists don't get out much, I suppose.
we really well. No, I mean like we literally.
They spend their evenings watching documentaries on Mormons, apparently.
Yes.
I mean we literally. Yeah. We literally do get out, but it's only to really remote places with other archaeologists. It's actually way worse than
they get out and then dig a hole wherever they are.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I want to share some. There's a bigger reason why I think it's really important to talk about pseudo-archaeology right now, and that is because it's a growing phenomenon. So there's some statistics that I can quote about how belief in pseudo-archaeology is on the rise. But what's really good is that we're also seeing professional archaeologists take pseudo-archaeology seriously. When I was studying, we were told about it a little bit, like especially, if you're doing a course on archaeological theory, you'll be like, and these are some of the not accepted scientific theories, and this is why they're pseudo-archaeologies. But we were never sort of encouraged to explicitly engage with pseudo-archaeology. It was a sort of policy of like, that's for them over there, and you don't want to be associated with that. But more recently,
I was looking last week, and I found there are 2 academic books on pseudo-archaeology.
Yeah.
Just 2. I thought that was amazing. And they're both really overpriced and incredibly difficult to get.
And very academic. They are sort of anthropological studies of what makes up pseudo-archaeology, which is very different from a sort of like engagement and things like that. But more recently, there are some great people doing really great work in this area, and maybe I'll get a chance to mention some of their work. But for now, I'm going to share my screen again. And I want to, first of all, show you this interesting set of statistics about the growth of, so this doesn't actually illustrate the growth, but it illustrates the prevalence of pseudo-archaeology beliefs. This is a study from the American Survey of Fears, and it's dated, I just have the data from 2017, but 55% of Americans believe that ancient advanced civilizations such as Atlantis once existed. What's also interesting is if you look towards the middle of the figure, 26% of Americans believe that aliens have come to Earth in modern times. But if you go to the ancient past, that belief in aliens in the ancient past jumps up to 35%.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew just says no.
So they came in the past, but they're not coming anymore. They got bored of us.
They found humans. Would you come back?
There's more time in the past. So maybe that's it. So I want to tell you guys about this toolkit that I mentioned for kind of debunking debunking ancient pseudo-archaeology. These are six.
So we need to get one of these. Is this what we need?
We need to get this toolkit. This is a picture of the actual tools that you are going to use. And it's a big wooden stick that you bash people over the head with. I know we said positive.
Positive.
You do it very positively. No. So these are the things that we see over and over again. And I want to ask you guys, does this spark anything? Examples of ancient technology was too primitive. Have you seen, what's an example of this that you've seen? And is there a logical fallacy that is underpinning this?
I think both me and Chris watched the first episode of Ancient Aliens at the weekend, so that whole thing was one big logical fallacy. And the things that stuck in my mind was, they wouldn't have been able to cut stone this precisely. They wouldn't have been able to move these blocks without some kind of anti-gravity device. The surface of the stone is so smooth that they couldn't possibly have done it by polishing it themselves.
Stonehenge, I think, is probably the most famous English example. People go, oh, well, the stones were mined in Wales and brought to sort of Downs, and how did they travel that far? But the thing that I always try and bear in mind is you've got to remember just how powerful local people were and how little they cared about human life when it comes down to trying to build monoliths.
So things haven't changed much here. Is that what you're saying?
Thankfully, yeah.
And do you guys, when we're saying their technology was too primitive, is there a logical fallacy that you guys are picking up on here?
Is racism a logical fallacy?
So let's talk about racism. Another
the word everyone wants to hear. Let's talk
Yes.
about racism.
we're gonna talk about racism, guys. Where I'm gonna try to also work Nazis into this at some point. So don't worry, we're gonna cover.
Awesome.
Are we doing
Godwin's
ancient Aryan
law.
theory?
Ancient Aryans. Yeah, that's exactly. So one of the big reasons why this is such a convenient sort of trap to fall into is it's easy to imagine ancient people being primitive and unsophisticated, especially if they are not our ancestors, sort of historically or culturally, and they don't look like us. It's really easy to fall into the trap that these people who are clearly inferior would never have been able to do this. And it can get very much tied up in racist ideology. And it's another reason to really be careful about this kind of line of reasoning. But I think there is a logical fallacy that underpins this whole thinking.
Is it not is the argument from ignorance?
That's what I think.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it's saying we have no idea how they could have done this, therefore we have to invoke a sort of supernatural explanation.
Yep, they're for aliens, Chris.
I'm going to play the aliens card. Oh, sorry, my mouse is very sensitive. So how do we counteract this when we see it? Like, do you guys have any suggestions for how you would advise someone if they come up to you in the street and they say, well, then we could have never done X. Look, it was those stones were too precisely aligned.
Do I have the stick with me at the time?
No, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There's no stick.
No stick.
I mean, like, do you just say, like, yeah, we don't know?
Yeah, I mean, there is nothing wrong with saying we don't know. But, you know, the fact that we don't know how someone did something doesn't mean they didn't do it. It's like you said, it is a logical fallacy. It's, you know, I don't know something, therefore I know something. And I think maybe pointing that out to them, showing that, you know, you can't go to a conclusion based on your lack of information about it. Sorry, I'm being attacked by a cat. Yeah, I think pointing that out is a good way to start.
Yeah, and what's interesting is there are often examples of, okay, well, you were going to get some people to figure out how we could have done this with ancient technology, but then it's quite easy to then dismiss that. You know, if you're a true believer, it's easy to dismiss that, to say, well, yeah, but you figured that out with your modern understanding of how engineering works, but the ancient people couldn't have done that. And then you're right. I think pointing out that it's a logical fallacy, and leaving room for human ingenuity is a way more exciting story than believing in aliens.
But also one of the things I always find sort of slightly curious is that, talking about this to someone at work about this, was that, like, when you've only got a small number of tools available, you become very good at doing stuff with just those tools. Whereas when you've got a vast variety of tools available, each one feels very specialist. You might look and go, well, a hammer, you know, someone with just a hammer and chisel could never have made that. I need a sander and a this and a that and the other. But actually, you know, if you have enough time and enough care and attention, then and enough sort of not historic knowledge, but that your community has built up the knowledge for, then actually you can do stupendous things with relatively simple tools, just combining them in imaginative ways.
Exactly.
One of the things that sort of struck me watching the program the other day was, I think it was the stonemason guy who made the comment of, you know, in order to do this properly, you'd have to spend years dedicated to doing it. And I can't imagine anyone doing that for the kind of pay they would have been given. And it's like, just because you wouldn't do it doesn't mean other people wouldn't do it.
And like, it's not like they had Netflix.
Yeah, if they'd had Netflix, they probably wouldn't have. They would have sat and watched Netflix instead. Yeah.
So the second item in our toolkit, the sort of debunking toolkit, the problem that I see in pseudo-archaeology is the idea that ancient records were 100% reliable. And so any sort of problematic or interesting features there, we have to explain. So like the example that I have is, this idea there was an ancient Egyptian light bulb because look at this sculpture, or look at this relief depiction.
This came up 3 times in the first season of Ancient Aliens. 3 times in 5 episodes they came up with this.
There's no other infrastructure for any electricity. There's no way.
No, but there is.
Looks to me more like an aubergine. Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying. that looks like an ancient Egyptian selfie.
But and what I think is really, what's going on here is this idea that you have to explain everything weird and that's happening in ancient art or ancient writing, and you end up constructing these very elaborate theories in order to fit everything to the model. I mean,
this is the same with the conspiracy theories we were looking at.
Exactly.
You go anomaly hunting, and then you find out a way to fit all the anomalies together.
Yeah, exactly.
But on a similar note, surely, like if in 300 years you're going back and looking at the media produced in our time, you would think that there was a city called Gotham, and that a guy dressed as a bat went running around beating people up and jumping off buildings and whatnot.
Or just Spider-Man was in New York.
Yeah, but like that's the same thing. Like, not all art is true.
And I know that some people in the chat want us to name drop Giorgio Tsoukalos, the guy from Ancient Aliens, who is.
And we would if we could pronounce his name. Right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, some of us can because I've worked in Greece, but and he's like, if you don't know, he is the guy from the meme. Like, we were watching it and Sam was like, "Oh my God, it's the guy with the hair." And we're not going to make any ad hominem comments about the hair because we're positive skeptics.
That's awesome.
There we go. So there was this great quote from him from Ancient Aliens about this exact sort of easy trap to fall into with pseudo-archaeology. He says, the ancient astronaut theory suggests that if we find paintings or carvings of half men, half animals, that means that those creatures really existed because they were genetically created by extraterrestrials. And when he said this, I had to stop and rewind it and write it down word for word, because this is the exact sort of crux of the problem. We need to find an explanation for every little weird thing that's happening.
And the idea that every folklore story has its basis in reality, which
exactly
is also the problem in cryptozoology a lot of the time.
Yep.
Trying to find a literal explanation for some myth or folklore.
And I think it's also related to that kind of baseline conspiracy psychology, that need to attribute a higher cause or a greater cause to something that's quite mundane. And it's a feature
of saying I don't know as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So the third piece in our archaeological toolkit is that big structures have to have big reasons why they existed, and therefore aliens.
Yep.
And so I don't know if any examples come to mind from you guys. Pyramids.
Stonehenge.
Yep. I was watching an episode
but not the Acropolis or the Colosseum.
Oh no,
they're fine. No. They were built by civilized people.
Yes.
I know. And is it just because with the people writing, who are often writing in English, are the sort of, or like of European descent, are the sort of cultural inheritors of the great Greek and Roman civilizations, and so that's why they are allowed to be the creators of their own technology, but other people, we have to invoke other explanations? Is it just because we have a lot more documentary evidence So there's less of that feeling of we don't know what's going on. Yeah, I don't know.
But is there so we were sort of prepping for this yesterday, you were saying that actually a lot of the cultures that seem to be targeted by shows like Ancient Aliens and by Pseudo-Archaeology are ones that we have next to no written records for, whereas actually when it comes down to, I think you were talking about sculpture in Greece, we have really clear records for how there was this really rapid advancement between sort of these very stiff poses and then these very natural poses, and there was a lot of writing about how this person had made this innovation and this person had developed it further, and how actually we've got a really close sort of chain of events, a bit like sort of evolving, looking at the evolution from one species to another species. You've got lots and lots of the kind of the links in between.
But that doesn't stop people trying to poke holes in the theory of evolution either.
No, it doesn't. But the more, is it called interstitial? But the more like interstitial examples you have,
intermediate,
the more difficult it is to say, but where's the hole that made this leap? Or like all these things suddenly came together. It's like, no, actually we've got 3 different ones each which had.
I really did get the impression the Ancient Aliens people were going into the documentation that closely.
No,
well,
but
the Atlantis people
it's difficult to say aliens when someone goes, no, Jeff.
They did that. They did it in one of the episodes I watched. They talked about crop circles, and we know that was done by Jeff.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, no, we know that Clef claimed he did it.
Well, so we
and was able to completely recreate them perfectly as they appear.
Yeah, exactly. And like other examples are sort of like this idea that the picture that I was showing is of the Nazca lines in Peru, and therefore it has to be, these are all landing platforms for spacecraft or runways for spacecraft. And I like that, the example of like, why would this very advanced civilization with technology that we can't even describe, let alone build, suddenly needs us to help them build a runway or a platform just for the last 10 meters of their journey, having traveled across light years? This is the—
You talk to any pilot, they will tell you the landing is the hardest part.
The landing is the hardest part. That's a good point.
Yeah, but not rocket astronauts.
I just want to know what kind of spaceship needs to land in the shape of a spider.
What I loved is they were looking at these flattened off mountains. They were going, they must have landed there. Why would they need to land on top of the mountain and then walk down? Wouldn't it be better to land on ground level?
Yeah.
Also, forgive me, but autopilot, the SpaceX rockets land themselves. They don't have human, it's not landed by a human. It lands itself. You don't need. Now, admittedly, maybe that was a little before the Ancient Aliens began, but still, if we have the capacity to go across light years and we don't have the capacity for our ships to land themselves in basically any terrain,
I think you're bringing too much logic to bear here.
Also, we go all this way to this new planet and we don't bring anything to build with us. We just teach them how to do better carving.
But also,
we don't bring cement or metal or anything with us.
This is why I was having an aneurysm watching Ancient Aliens. It's just so many holes. So why are there no plastics or ceramics or shards of rare earth metals and things around these places?
But if you go anomaly hunting, sometimes there are.
But not enough. You can't just say there's that question of there's a bit of a no true Scotsman in that. If someone says, there's 1,000 examples of aliens, and you go, well, 99 of them we've demonstrated there's no example of this, that, the other, or so on, and go, yeah, but the other one, those weren't true alien examples. Those were just fake alien examples. This one, though, this is a real alien thing.
It's almost like extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Yes.
Just a radical idea. Yeah, exactly. So let's go to the 4th item in our toolkit. And that is one thing that comes up is this idea that there are uncanny similarities between what people are building across the world, and that we need some pseudo-archaeology theory. We need some theory that is, very big to explain what's happening here. So often it's aliens, but it could be there's another whole sort of area of theories called hyper-diffusionist theories. The idea that we have, big contact between very distant populations, and that's what explains these huge similarities. And then you have to explain, well, how did this contact happen? How were people in Paleolithic Europe able to reach the New World from Europe during the middle of an ice age when there's zero evidence that they came via that route? So I love this example, and I love this meme that actually one of those great archaeologists who is becoming really active on social media, sort of talking about pseudo-archaeology, that he created. His name is David S. Anderson, if you want to follow him on Twitter. He is great. So are there any other examples that you guys can think where you've seen people talking about this? I think that like the pyramids is the main one.
Yeah. The pyramid thing just gets me, because it's like, oh, look, there's pyramids all over the world. There must be some kind of connection between it. And yeah, the connection is that it's a really easy way to build things tall. You tried to build with the blocks for the baby. Everyone knows if you try to build a tower just straight upwards, it's more likely to fall over. But if you build a layer, then a slightly smaller layer on top, it's going to be quite stable. And if children can work out this, I'm pretty sure ancient cultures could work it out.
But on top of it as well is that there's a survival bias in that, really tall towers built 4,000 years ago have most likely collapsed.
Yes.
Whereas the pyramids are very resilient. And so they're stuck around. So maybe it was that people were building not just pyramids, but loads of other things at the same time. And most of them have just been destroyed.
There's a reason why Jenga isn't a pyramid. It would be a somewhat boring game.
Yeah, and actually on that topic of what survives, so survivorship bias is basically what the study of archaeology is. It's just one giant lesson in survivorship bias, because that's the lens through which we have to understand everything. Every sort of scientific study of archaeology has to find a way of overcoming the fact that we have an incomplete record of what survives. And that's actually why, so I was studying archaeological chemistry, and that's why there's so much interest in what isotopes can tell us in archaeology. And I'm not going to go into a big chemistry lesson here. But basically, if say I want to understand you and your health, I could measure the iron levels in your blood, right? And I could say wow, you've got iron deficiency, or I can measure lead in your blood and be wow, you've got lead poisoning. The problem with measuring those things in a human skeleton that's ancient is we have no baseline. We have no idea how much lead or whatever it is there should be, because there's been decay, there's been chemical decay processes that have been happening to those all that chemistry in the bone.
So there's a chance that you might test it and find really high lead content because the lead has remained and everything else has gone away. So
exactly. Or maybe we've had lead come in from another source that's contaminated it. So that's why. So if you don't know what an isotope is that chemical element, but that has a modification in its nucleus that means that it's slightly heavier, but it behaves chemically pretty much identically to the original. So carbon is carbon, if it's carbon 12, carbon 13, or carbon 14. But what's great is that so when we do radiocarbon dating, we don't just measure the amount of carbon 14. We measure the amount of carbon 14 relative to 13 and 12. And that's what tells us how much there should have been. And therefore it tells us how old the thing is. So isotopes end up being super powerful in archaeology because it helps us overcome this survivorship bias problem. And that's why the word isotope is in my PhD thesis. And I don't have a chemistry degree, you know, speaking of how interdisciplinary archaeology is. So moving on to the fifth item in our toolbox. This is a common trope in pseudo-archaeology. It's that stuff is aligned with the stars, or ancient people seem to have a weird obsession with the stars. Well, how do you guys debunk that one?
I'm not sure
There
I'd
are
necessarily
so many
debunk
stars that everything can be aligned.
Yeah.
It could take 3 bolts off my back and they would be aligned with the stars.
Lovely.
I'm not going to, but
Yeah, let's not. I'm not sure I would even bother debunking it. I would just go, okay, they could see the stars as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, if I was going to decide I want to align some things with the stars, I wouldn't require aliens to do it. I could just do it.
Also,
You know, I mean, you could just get a tube, look through the tube and go, right, that's the star. I'll put it here. And it's that simple.
well, and I think this channel is set for not for children. If I was, sorry, that's...
What the hell are you about to say?
Casual swearing.
There's a hell of a build-up to this.
No, I was
bringing the aubergine man back.
If we humans were to travel to another world that was more primitive than us, we wouldn't naturally be saying, "Oh, you've got to make sure that you align your major buildings with stars," unless we were just trying to fuck with them. Like that's the.
Wouldn't we?
Well, some of us would, but I would hope that sensible heads would prevail.
If humans ever meet a sort of less advanced culture, we will totally troll them. We, you know, it's in our nature.
But in small ways, not in like build all your monuments ways.
You know, we're not sending them our best.
So as an archaeologist, we would quite often talk about like how we would just mess with archaeologists. Like I have been digging and I have come across like an entire beautiful amphora, say like a small one, and it's in pieces, but it's like you can see that like it's all just like cracked where it's sitting, and half of it is just gone. And I'm like, guys, like we're excavating this whole area. Where is the other half of my amphora? And it never turns up. Like, you know, we go through every pottery shard often, but you know what I mean? Like you go through the important ones. Like there's no, it wasn't there. Just speaking of survivorship bias, stuff just, and the explanation is that of course that like whatever the event was that caused this amphora to be abandoned and decayed, you know, like a building gets abandoned and blah blah blah. What often happens is like they'll kind of like do the ancient equivalent of bulldozing when they want to build a new building over top, and so they'll just like move a bunch of rubble around, like dig out this area, flatten everything, and be like, all right, put some new soil on top, be like, hey, we're good to go, build another building. And so that's how you end up losing stuff over time. But anyways, speaking of trolling, we'd be like, so yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to like demand that half of my skeleton gets buried in one place and half of my body gets buried in another place. And I'm just going to be like, archaeologists of the future, deal with it. But yes, intend to be beetled in a fetal position, cradling a charged Nokia phone, surrounded by toasters. That's a good one. Troll the archaeologists.
Hang on, but you're going to also have that phone have the snake high, like the maximum snake high score, just to be like, yeah, you know what?
Like I was a god of snake. Yeah, so I want to say actually the other thing about being obsessed with stars is that we in the last like 200 years or so have become weirdly not obsessed with stars. It's actually an anomaly in human history to not like just constantly know what the phase of the moon is.
Isn't that because we've pretty much blotted out the nighttime sky and we can't see them anymore?
And we don't need it. Like if you go to like, I don't know, there was a history of science museum in Oxford. It is just full of, and I'm going to use the correct Latin, astrolabia, deal with it. I actually don't know if that's the correct one. Probably, I think it is.
Feminism getting into academia again.
But like it's just full of like devices to measure the stars with, and the whole ability of people like Portugal and England and the Dutch to go and establish these colonies all over the world. That was enabled by technology that allowed people to precisely measure their position on Earth by measuring the stars and also knowing what time it was. So it's super important. Like I was telling Sam last night, like imagine that there's been like a nuclear apocalypse and you go to your special bunker or whatever and you've got all the things that you need to restart civilization. You've got like seeds and you've got like farm equipment or whatever, and you emerge from your bunker at some point after everything is safe. You have no idea how long it's been, but you know that you need to start growing food in order to survive. What's the first thing you have to do?
Work out when to plant the stuff.
You have to figure out, like, is it winter? Is it summer? Should I wait? Should I do it now? Is everything going to die? And the ability to be able to track the movement of the sun and say, hey, like, and imagine this as a cool party trick. If you're like in a farming village in the Neolithic, I'd be like, okay, guys, the days have been getting shorter and shorter. We can measure it. We're putting like sticks in the ground where we can see the sunrise and the sunset every day. It's getting farther and farther north. The sun is disappearing and we are all going to die. But tomorrow, guys, the sun is coming back. And I can tell you that it is going to happen tomorrow. And it does. And they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like now we know when to plant our crops, and they won't just use the sun, right? They'll use the pattern of the moon relative to the sun. They will look for the rising of certain stars at certain times of year. So like, I don't know if you know that like the constellation Orion is visible for us in the Northern Hemisphere, like shortly after sunset in the winter. So like if you're like out, you're coming back from something in the evening in the winter and you look to the south, you'd be like, oh, there's Orion. And then you're like, I always forget about Orion in the summer. That's because it's not visible at this time of day, at this time of year.
If we do ever go to another planet and we find people in the Neolithic age, we're not going to be able to teach them anything, are we?
We are not. I mean,
I don't know carving. I don't know how to deal with stars. I don't know, guys.
I can teach you about isotopes.
I can teach you how to play Snake on the Nokia, but that's about it.
And one of my near aneurysms last night was that, like, if I was an ancient alien and I came down and was like, okay, I'm going to teach you really advanced building, but not medicine. I'm not going to teach you any of that. I'm not going to make you literate. I'm not going to teach you how to, like, cure diseases or grow crops properly or, like, basic sanitary, like, wash your hands. Like, how many lives could you save with just wash your hands? Sorry, I'm just going to go...
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So then my last piece in the toolkit is another like, this really just kind of sums up all of pseudo-archaeology, which is that we don't know why certain things happened, but it doesn't mean that it was aliens. Sometimes,
are you sure about that?
I am willing to be proven wrong.
It doesn't mean it was aliens, but
but it almost certainly wasn't. Go on.
People do weird stuff for pleasure all the time. Erika's
Rule 34, guys, Rule 34.
This is not set for children, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I was just saying, Erika's been knitting a Star Wars themed scarf on and off for like the last 3 years. I like hand carved some tiles out of clay to make a carved Settlers of Catan set. Like
we're really cool, by the way.
But like
you can teach the Neolithic people things. I'll take it back.
Although turns out I don't know how to fire clay, though. I'll say that. But it's people are random and impulsive, and you end up with like weird, given how much weird in-jokes can build up, it doesn't feel that odd that weird other traditions can build up as well. Like the the Easter Island heads, or building enormous pyramids when you die, and sphinxes and stuff.
People do weird stuff. The cat's so cute. And I think, like, when I think about maybe somebody who loves watching the show Ancient Aliens or is obsessed with documentaries about Atlantis, and they get wrapped up in the story and in the storytelling. There's actually a great alternative here, which is that our own ancestors were amazing and incredibly ingenuitive. That's not a word. They had so much smart. They knew stuff good. But that our ancestors were so inventive and creative and able to solve problems and had these amazing ways of expressing themselves. And it says something about the wonderful, diverse experience of what it is to be human, that none of us know what it is. We're trying to figure it out. And looking at something from the past and saying, we don't understand it. But isn't that amazing? That's to me, it's such a better story than Aliens did it.
As much as we've sort of slagged it off this evening, I actually quite enjoyed watching the episodes I watched. Let's say I enjoyed a third of them because, maybe 2/3, because there's this amazing thing from the past. Look how cool it is. We can't recreate that. That I enjoyed. And then because it's alien, therefore it's aliens bit. Yes. But yeah, I really enjoyed watching the look at these really interesting things we've discovered from the past and stuff, and just
those are history and archaeology programs.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're watching those.
They actually do quite. I can understand.
You can watch those and not have the aliens bit. Yeah,
get rid of the aliens. Though I suppose it's like we said before, it's the psychological thing. If you did a program where basically they went, here's this cool thing from the past, we don't know how they made it, we can't recreate it now, let's move on. That leaves the question open. But if you answer the question with whatever you answer it with, you've psychologically met a need there. You fulfilled
What if we pitch a mashup of Ancient Aliens without the aliens and Mythbusters, where they do a Mythbusters style, having a go at seeing if they can recreate something using ancient technology?
So here's something interesting from the past. We can't recreate it now. It wasn't aliens.
Yep. So we're going to blow it up instead because it's Mythbusters. You've got to blow something up at the end.
Yeah.
Erika's point at the beginning of this little section did remind me of a Douglas Adams quote that I've looked up in its entirety, which is that, isn't it enough to see that garden is beautiful without having to believe there are fairies at the bottom of it? And it feels like it's very much the same sentiment. It doesn't have to be aliens to be brilliant.
I can't remember what this is, but there's a great channel on YouTube where there's a guy basically recreating everything from scratch. So he learns how to make pottery, how to smelt iron and things like that. And it's really interesting because how would people approach these problems? And he's doing it with all our modern knowledge and stuff. But it's that side of things is interesting enough.
But all that really means is that he's fast tracking the trial and error that hundreds of thousands of people did over thousands of years.
Yeah. So, that was everything that I wanted to talk about. My timing, by the way, has been excellent. Like 10 out of 10, guys.
Yeah, definitely.
Have you got something in the oven again?
No, we've made tacos and everything is all, like, the meat is all cooked. So there's no oven-related emergency that we have to get to. And, I wanted to, as always, invite anyone who's watching to follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment, and give us a suggestion for something that you would like to hear about next time. Andrew, what have we got coming up next?
I'm going to be talking about the flat Earth, and so yes.
Really?
I have been breaking my brain.
I've spent 2 weeks watching Ancient Aliens. Now you're going to make me watch Flat Earth.
I'm going to make you watch Flat Earth videos instead. Don't worry, I can send you some good ones, Chris. It's good is relative, but yes, going to be looking at the psychology, some philosophy, and even some science that we can take from people who believe in the flat Earth.
I still have to be positive.
Yes, you have to be positive.
We always want to be positive. Yeah, but I will say, and this is, I think, factual rather than pejorative, I don't think the production values are as high on the flat Earth videos as they are for Ancient Aliens. I think that's part of the reason why Ancient Aliens is so compelling. Is certainly like the actual show, the On History Channel, is pretty well produced, which is part of why I think people get really, they really enjoy it.
Well, it has the sheen of legitimacy.
Yeah, exactly. But we will be
on the History Channel.
Well, and that's a problem in itself that we can discuss another day. For now, I just want to thank everyone. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you everyone in the chat. And we'll I see we have also got a volunteer to be a moderator, which is awesome. So we'll have to follow up with that.
We'll have to get more than 2 people talking to actually need a moderator.
He'll have to moderate himself at the moment.
The moderators can talk to themselves, guys. We'll start with that. We'll take what we can get. But this is super fun. We enjoy doing it. We love talking to each other. We love inviting everyone to come and be a part of it. So thank you, and we will see you next time.
Cheers.
Yes.